Kristina, мы с тобой в Переделкино.
Kristina, we are in Peredelkino. You've been wanting to bring me here for a long time, and now we are here.
I'm glad that we made it, finally.
Let's tell the story of why we decided to make this film.
Probably, we will have different versions because human memory is subjective, and we remember those bright moments that are close to each of us. That's how I remember this story. We met more than 2 years ago, and when we started talking about what each of us was doing, I also once played the cello as an amateur, and I was wondering how you employed your talent not only musically, but also in a humanitarian way. And when we started discussing it, I guess we created an idea almost immediately. I remember we were in a cafe, talking and thinking about some new concepts, and then this one appeared. That we can unite the science that I work on and the art that you do in order to convey as widely as possible very simple ideas that are close to me and my colleagues. The idea is that united, regardless of our occupations, where we're located or what we do, we can change the way patients with cancer, possibly the most horrible disease that humanity has faced, receive care. And we can convert cancer from the dreaded disease that many people are afraid of into a medical challenge that can be solved together with my colleagues.
Cancer accompanies humanity throughout its whole history. Studying the human remains from different eras, the scientists discovered traces of cancer not only in ancient Egyptian pharaohs, Scythian kings, and Neanderthals, but even in the ancestors of Homo sapiens, Australopithecus. This is a tumor of the bone of an ancient man, osteosarcoma, which is more than 1.5 million years old. A malignant tumor looks like a crab or a crayfish. This was first noticed by Hippocrates, so he called the tumor a carcinoma, from the Greek word crab. Translated into Latin, it is cancer. Hippocrates described breast cancer and some other tumors, but he couldn't understand the nature of this disease. More than hundreds of years of observations, studies, and experiments had to pass before scientists and doctors could understand its nature. There are many reasons why people get cancer. What is the main reason as of today? Most people always think that the disease arises from something. This is a very convenient type of thinking because if it results from something, then it could have been avoided when the cancer appears. People often start thinking, what did they do wrong? This question doesn't make sense here. Cancer is a disease that appears spontaneously. It's a game of probabilities. One of the main causes of cancer is random events in the genome that we can't predict. They arise by themselves, and the human body starts to fight them. In some cases, these random events are recurring. They accumulate, and the body cannot cope with them.
Each cell, of which we have trillions, each cell contains 3 meters of DNA. And that DNA needs, under appropriate circumstances, to replicate itself, to make a copy. Well, if you think about 3 meters of DNA in every cell, trying to make a copy of it, of course there are going to be mistakes made. It's impossible. Even the most precise machine in the world, or the most precise computer, could never replicate the DNA correctly. And so, yes, mutations, I mean, we would call mistakes in the DNA, we would call them mutations. Mutations are made all the time, but probably most of them are not important. minor spelling mistakes. Many of them occur in parts of the DNA that don't encode genes. Probably a lot of mistakes are fatal to the cell. So there's a mistake, but the cell dies. So getting cancer is a pretty rare event if you consider how many mistakes are being made all of the time.
Okay, so imagine you do a Xerox of something and keep copying it over and over and over again, and the copies get worse and worse and worse. Well, when you do it digitally, that doesn't happen. You know, you can make digital copies. They don't seem to get worse. So in a sense, biology does digital copies, but mutations occur where a little thing has changed. One of the little chemicals in the DNA. So DNA, as you know, is a molecule that has a spiral, and it's made of thousands and thousands of what they call base pairs. Little ladders. The ladders are the base pairs, the little steps on the ladder. And if just one of them goes wrong, it causes a mutation. Sometimes that mutation doesn't have any effect. Sometimes it can be lethal. So what happens is just before the cell divides, there's these genes that look and say, is this DNA okay? And it's a checkpoint. And if it isn't, it tells the cell to commit suicide. And they just discovered this in the late 70s when I was studying cancer. And they realized that this mutated p53 gene allowed cells that had mutated to go ahead and divide. So basically, cancer is, when you look at it, it's a disease of cell division. What happens to a cancer cell is all cells in our body have a job. Every cell in our body has a job. It does something. There's skin cells. There's cells of the eye, the liver, the brain, the muscles. There's thousands of different cell types. Each one has a job. When it turns cancerous or mutates, it doesn't do its job anymore. And all it does is divide. That's its only job. It takes on the job of cell division because this checkpoint, this p53 checkpoint, and there are a lot of other checkpoints, by the way. First one was p53. It's not there anymore. It doesn't ask, is this cell okay? And it just lets the cell continue to divide and divide and divide, and that's how you get the tumor.
Cancer is a disease of malignant cells. Cancer can be compared to a mistake in a cellular score, like a cell that has strayed from a harmonic fret that immediately turns it into a cell of death.
There is no one amongst us who does not know what cancer is. There is no one amongst us who does not have someone close who has experienced the disease.
If cancer has always accompanied people, why do we see more people with cancer today?
According to statistics, every third or every fourth person is at risk of developing cancer during their lifetime. Therefore, if we project this fact onto our families, close friends and colleagues, then we realize that there are people among each of us who suffer from cancer. And this is due to several reasons. Despite the prevailing opinions that blame various factors for being responsible for more cancer cases now, in fact, firstly, we have become more knowledgeable of these diseases, and we have learned how to diagnose and detect them better. Every year, physicians have more and more tools to understand and to distinguish the development of malignant tumors in patients. We have acquired more options to detect the early stages of cancer. Sometimes we can even detect precancerous diseases, and this is very important for screening and prevention. Therefore, on the one hand, we have improved detection, but moreover, people have begun to live longer, and it is well known that cancer incidence is associated with age. As my colleagues say, some people simply don't live long enough to develop cancer. Indeed, we observe an increase in the incidence of malignant tumors with age. That means that the longer people live, the greater chance that they will develop cancer.
And how are things now compared to previous centuries?
в его нынешнем представлении не существовало.
The concept of cancer in the form in which it is now didn't exist earlier. Firstly, most internal diseases were not diagnosed. Secondly, people didn't live to the age when the cause of their death was cancer, because they could be killed by tuberculosis, injuries, inflammations, or infections. Cancer was not the main cause of human mortality. If we wouldn't count those who haven't been diagnosed with it, then there are none at all. If you look through the literature of the 19th century, you will not find anyone who died of cancer. However, people massively died of pulmonary tuberculosis that reflected the epidemiology.
In the 19th century, the disease was just beginning to be studied and first described, and we now understand that these were various cancer cases. For the first time, many processes were described. That became the basis for the future studies. For example, it became clear that the development of a malignant tumor was damage in a cell, and it became the basis for further substantial research related to cancer biology. Therefore, it's very difficult to elaborate on cancer in the early years. We see it as single fragments, which later shape the whole interesting observations. When physicians look at some artwork and try to diagnose the people depicted. We also have findings of anthropological studies in which a tumor was accidentally found. In some descriptions made by the ancient doctors, we understand that it was a tumor, but surely there were no statistics, and we don't know what the course of the disease was in that time. Of course, there was no treatment. Moreover, people died early. Let me remind you that until the 20th century, before the 1930s, even the 1940s, we had no antibiotics. So a lot of people died of infections at a young age.
So, the cell lives and grows in accordance with the program laid down inside it. It breathes, feeds, reacts, adapts, performs its solo part according to the notes written by nature. But with a single breakdown in the genome, the disease begins. How did you find out about your illness?
Well, I think it starts when I was making a film on the Big Island of Hawaii called Waterworld, and I don't know how anybody discovers cancer until it happens. I think it's either something that's part of you. It certainly is a part of your journey in life, and mine is, and I've thought about it a lot. The film itself was a very arduous film. It was an amazing amount of pressure to do something that was never going to be achieved again in the way that we did it. And part of that journey was the stress of the work. It was a year and a half of very stressful work. And at the end of that time, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease through a biopsy in my neck, and needing to go through the chemotherapy and radiation for 9 months.
It was in November of 2018. I just ran a marathon, space marathon, in Korolev, and set myself the goal to finish the full program Ironman in 2019. Of course, the most difficult thing for me was swimming. I started to go swimming to improve my skills. Already at the third training, I realized that my arms were rowing, but my legs were not. During the next training session, it was exactly the opposite. I had a feeling that by 3 p.m. my battery was simply discharged, and I had no power. I was playing football at the same period, and I had a big bruise on my arm, and I didn't pay attention to the fact that it didn't go away at all for a long time. And so, On the 1st of 2019, I woke up with shortness of breath. At that time, I did not yet know that my thrombocytes were low. So I was suffocating from blood clots stuck in my nose. When I woke up, the whole pillow was covered in blood. On the 1st of January, I wiped everything. On the 8th, I went to a private clinic, took a blood test for the first time. I endured for 8 days. The next day at 5 a.m., I got a call from the lab, and they said, "Artem?" "Yes." And they're like, "Phew, thank God." They told me to go to the hospital urgently, otherwise my blood will flow out. I remember that I was driving following the lights of a bus in front of me, as everything was blurry in my eyes. On the second day, when I had a bone marrow aspiration, I began to suspect that something was wrong. 3 days after that, I came up to the doctor, Nadezhda Ivanova, and asked her, "Why don't you tell me the diagnosis?" And she asked me if I was ready to learn it. So I said, "Do I have cancer or something?" And she said, "Yes." But I was just joking. Then I realized that she wasn't joking. When I left the office, I started crying, and I never seen tears of this size. They flowed without ceasing. That's how I found out about my diagnosis. Then it was sent to Moscow and confirmed there. Everything happened very quickly. It wasn't like they could not understand what it was for a long time. They immediately said it was leukemia. Cancer has become a leading cause of death. It has overtaken cardiovascular diseases, in the treatment of which we have made great progress. Therefore, we began to live longer. We have become effectively cured from other diseases, but not from cancer. We are not very good at treating it, and even more so in prevention. Therefore, if there's something that we can beat effectively, and something that we can't beat, this latter something becomes the most important thing. How many types of malignant tumors exist? We've already mentioned that the cancer is a disease of cells. There are more than 200 types of cells in our body. According to researchers, there are more than 100 types of cancer, but most often we encounter several common types. 3 most common types of tumors nowadays, if we don't take into account hematological malignancies, and skin cancer, are colon and rectal cancer, breast cancer, and lung cancer. And this data will change by 2036. Breast cancer will take first place, prostate cancer will take the second place, and colorectal cancer will be in the third place. Every year, doctors detect more and more new cancer cases and deaths from it, not only in our country, but also in the whole world. According to statistics, the number of cases globally will be growing every year. The number of new cancer cases will increase by 13% in 2036. And what does it mean? Will it be a cancer epidemic soon? Are there any heavenly places on earth where people don't get sick and don't die from it? Are there national specifics? There are some national specifics. It is well known that stomach cancer is very common in Asian regions. This is due to the specifics of the region and nutrition. Stomach cancer is in the top 5 in Russia, but we expect that the incidence of stomach cancer will decrease by 2036. That's what the increase in the number of new cancer cases in 2036 is associated with. First, the population growth. The increase in the number of people affects the number of sick people. Second, the aging of the population. Cancer is a disease of the elderly. Third, the social factors and social well-being. Obesity is one of the important factors in the incidence of cancer. But there are also some positive factors. Nowadays, the number of patients with lung cancer is decreasing. Fewer and fewer people smoke now. There is also some good news that despite the fact that the cancer incidence is increasing, there are fewer deaths, and this is significant progress. Mortality will decrease by 20%. If global science and medicine stand against cancer together with healthy lifestyle and widespread prevention methods, cancer can be defeated. The role of science in the search for new treatments is invaluable. Because of scientific discoveries, new medicines and methods of treatment are emerging, including cancer. The earliest method in the history of the fight against cancer was surgical. The tumor was cut out. After that, doctors and patients only hoped that it would not come back. In 1898, Marie and Pierre Curie discovered new elements of the periodic table, radium and polonium, which had radioactive properties. At the same time, it was found out that radium radiation damages chromosomes inside of cells. A year later, radium was used to damage cancer cells for the first time. This is how radiation therapy appeared.
Overall, active research on radiation began during that time. We all know the story of Marie and Pierre Curie, who studied radioactivity. At the same time, there were many experiments, and we received a great deal of information from different laboratories about the effect of radiation on different processes. Over time, it became clear that radiation could become the basis for cancer therapy.
They received the Nobel Prize for this discovery in 1903. The founder of chemotherapy was Paul Ehrlich. He was a German doctor, immunologist, bacteriologist, and chemist. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1908. He suggested that strong poisons could kill cancer cells. First chemotherapeutic medicines emerged after the First World War. These were the derivatives of the toxic substance iperite, mustard gas.
Systemic treatment started with so-called chemotherapy. I think many people know what this means, and some are very scared of it. Traditionally, chemotherapy was associated with a large number of side effects, which was true. Initially, chemotherapy included medicines that affected rapidly dividing cells. Since a tumor comprises of a bunch of malignant cells with the main characteristic being the uncontrolled division and the absence of suppressive mechanisms that lead to cell death. Consequently, these rapidly and uncontrollably dividing cells can be killed by chemotherapeutic agents that target these mechanisms of rapid division. But there are other rapidly dividing cells in the human body, like blood and skin cells. Of course, the chemotherapeutic effect hits not only the tumor, but when administered systemically, also affects healthy cells, which causes side effects.
Each of these cancer treatment methods did not stand still, but continuously improved and developed, relying on new scientific discoveries. The Nobel Prize for Cancer Chemotherapy was awarded in 1988. It was received by 3 laureates: American biochemist and pharmacologist Gertrude Elion, American biochemist George Hitchings, and Scottish pharmacologist James Black. They discovered a way to invent substances that will destroy predominantly malignant cells. Anti-cancer medicines based on purine derivatives, theoguanine, and mercaptopurine, similar to nucleic acids, were produced in the 50s.
The scientists did not stop there. They continued their work and assumed that it was very important to have medicines in their arsenal that will work in a precisely targeted way. And to do this, it was necessary to understand what the difference was between a malignant and a non-malignant cell. Research advanced in this direction and provided the basis for a powerful kit in the arsenal of our therapeutic tools, which was called targeted therapy. These drugs have a targeted and precise effect. We know that some tumor cells differ from normal ones by very specific rearrangements. For example, some kind of a genetic alteration that causes the development of the disease and clearly distinguishes a tumor cell from a healthy one. In some cases, we can develop a medicine that will precisely hit the target, and the target is the result of this gene mutation. This is how it happened with the first targeted therapeutics for breast cancer, chronic myeloid leukemia, lung cancer, when it became clear that the targeted therapy itself led to treatment response. For instance, one of the early applications of targeted therapy was in the treatment of chronic myeloid leukemia. We observed the fact that patients with the disease started to live longer and to have life expectancy comparable to the general population. This is one of the examples when the disease used to be fatal earlier, and within 5 years we lost the vast majority of patients. But now it has become possible for them to live almost a full life with a well-controlled disease. Making the disease manageable is one of our major goals.
Hormone therapy for cancer appeared thanks to the research of the American oncologist Charles Branton Huggins. He discovered that hormones affected prostate cancer. If you suppress the production of testosterone in the patient's body and use estrogen as therapy, then the development of the tumor can be stopped. In the 20th century, many Nobel Prizes were awarded for discoveries and research in the search for new treatments, direct or indirect. An effective method of treating leukemia was discovered by the American transplant doctor Edward Thomas. It was called bone marrow transplantation. He was the first in the world who successfully transplanted bone marrow in 1969. He received the Nobel Prize for that in 1990. For more than 100 years, scientists have been trying to engage the immune system in the fight against cancer. And now it has become possible because of the discoveries of the American immunologist James Ellison and the Japanese immunologist Tasuku Honjo.
Another type of treatment is immunotherapy. If you follow the Nobel Prize winners, you might have noticed that in 2018, the Nobel Prize was awarded to 2 scientists who provided the basis for the development of 2 groups of immunotherapeutic agents. This is a very interesting approach. We know that in general there is immunity against tumors. Many of us may now have malignant tumor cells in our bodies. We just don't know about it because our body can cope with them by various means. And one of these mechanisms is anti-tumor immunity.
At the end of the last century, they discovered special proteins on the surface of immune cells that work like brakes and prevented immune cells from destroying the malignant cells. Researchers have figured out how to remove these brakes and unlock the immune cells in patients. They received the Nobel Prize in 2018 for this. As you can see, all the main methods of cancer treatment are recognized as the greatest achievements of science. But research continues and brings new discoveries for the 21st century.
And the latest achievements which we witness are advanced immune therapy and cellular adoptive immunotherapy. This is the approach when we use our own immune cells, modify them by targeting them to the tumor, and return them to the body to fight the tumor. And of course, gene therapy, which is currently being tested in various methods and applications, is helping to precisely destroy the tumor.
What are the main directions in the scientific research of malignant cells? What recent studies do you think are extremely important and significant?
Вы знаете, я думаю, что если говорить о прогрессе в области онкологии в целом...
If we talk about progress in the field of oncology, in general and in cancer biology in particular, Then, one of the significant events was the adoption of a massive funding program for research in the field of oncology in the early 70s in the United States. After 20 to 30 years, it led to tremendous success in oncology research, as well as new medicines appeared.
Members of the Senate, members of the House, ladies and gentlemen, we are here today for the purpose of signing the Cancer Act of 1971. And I hope that in the years ahead, that we may look back on this day and this action as being the most significant action taken during this administration. It could be, because when we consider what cancer does each year in the United States, we find that more people each year die of cancer in the United States than all the Americans who lost their lives in World War II.
If in the early era of clinical oncology medicines were selected empirically, some combinations of substances that later became the standard of treatment, new medicines, began to be invented since the late 90s based on the deep knowledge of molecular mechanisms. The processes of how proteins function in tumor cells or how the altered signal spreads and so on. Of course, there is the general field of oncology, but when nowadays we speak about cancer, we are not talking about a dozen or 100 different diseases. Most likely, we are talking about thousands of different diseases that vary in biology. This leaves a huge imprint on how this field is developing and will continue to develop. There is not and will never be a single cure for cancer. There will be dozens, hundreds of drugs for hundreds of different tumor types. Oncological diseases are divided according to several criteria. The location of the tumor, the type of tissue in which the cancer cells develop, the structure of cancer cells, and the principle of their division: carcinoma, sarcoma, leukemia, melanoma, lymphoma, glioma. In our center, we focus the research on cell therapy. Now, many people have heard about it since several breakthroughs occurred in this area. The idea was born more than 30 years ago. It was found out that an immune cell can attack a tumor cell with the help of genetic modification. But before it turned into a treatment option, more than 1 decade passed. It took another 10 years before animal experiments began. The first results of clinical trials appeared at the end of the 2010s, and the first therapy received market authorization after another 7 years in 2017. Its efficacy has been proven. That is to say, the path from an idea, a basic breakthrough, to a real medicine is very long. Which laboratories are leading in the world? The problem is that we don't know where we will succeed. The medications given to patients are just the tip of the iceberg. No one ever sees the rest, except for specialists. In order for one medicine to enter the market, hundreds of preclinical studies must be carried out. This is a race in which the medicine must win, but before that happens, dozens of them will fail. Behind every molecule, behind every technology, there is the labor of thousands of people and tens of millions of dollars of investments. This is not an easy process. This makes it even more interesting to follow. It is difficult to talk about the leading laboratories. We know the champions. There are major centers. First of all, large research centers in the USA, famous laboratories and cancer centers, from where the majority of new molecules emerge or where the most clinical trials are carried out. But it seems to me to be unfair to talk only about these champions, because as I said, those who lost or reached a scientific deadlock made a no less important contribution, as did the champions. Unfortunately, we don't know the future, and there is no guaranteed success. In order for one idea to be successful, you need to try dozens of different ways. I constantly think about those smart, educated scientists who have taken the wrong way, which didn't lead to the success, not because they were less smart, but because of laboratory circumstances and choices. Still, in the end, Their contribution is not of less importance than of the people who eventually succeeded. What difficulties did you face during treatment?
The psychological aspect of it, the wondering and knowing if it's ever going to go into remission, and I asked if there was somebody that could help me with that, and the suggestion came to talk to a psychiatrist, and in that time I was taught about visualization, finding a safe place, which I got to set up myself, and that safe place was a place that when things got very difficult and on a mental, psychological level, I was able to go to this place and have that place be some solace, some gravitas of memories of when I was not in the cancer, and that was a huge help in arriving at that. The rest was really a pragmatic, tried and true test of what had come before me medically, and then given to me as a process of healing.
The most difficult thing is to get into a good information environment, which I was able to. Everyone starts looking for something on the internet, and there is only negative information, but I found those who won. I was lucky because I got to Alexey Vikarov's page. He is on Instagram after he had leukemia for 15 years. He had a video on YouTube about how to run 80 kilometers. I thought, how is it after all this? And yesterday, this guy who conquered cancer in 2019 took the Olympic medal and turned the world around. This is very cool, and such examples should refute the stereotype that cancer is a death sentence. Of course, we still have a lot to discover, but already today the situation with the diagnosis of cancer is different from the recent one. Now, doctors have blood tests and other biological samples, biopsies, x-rays, magnetic resonance imaging, and computer tomography. But is early cancer diagnosis available? And what should people know about it? The problem is not in access, but in the fact that patients do not go to the necessary examinations. Some simply do not have the necessary information. They think, why do I need to do a colonoscopy or a gastroscopy if I feel well? Also, not all women follow the recommendations and visit gynecologists and mammologists. The problem is not inaccessibility, but non-attendance. What new test systems have been developed in laboratories?
The introduction of the next generation sequencing as a diagnostic method is a great achievement. Now it is a healthcare service that can be provided to patients. This is a very big step forward. It gives us hope that in the near future, we will be able to bring to the market such test systems that will help us, on the one hand, to tell if a person has a disease, and on the other, to make an analysis and to find some kind of marker that indicates sensitivity to some of the known medicines.
Will people ever be able to test themselves for cancer as for diabetes, for example? There is no universal test for cancer. All tests, non-invasive, which are associated with diagnostics, determine some parameter with a certain sensitivity or specificity. So there's a probability of a false positive or a false negative test result. Moreover, there is a possibility that the test result can be inaccurate because all the biochemical metabolic parameters are influenced by a large number of factors. That is called a pre-analytical stage of material sampling. Even for blood glucose tests, there are recommendations on when and how to use them, and in which cases. Unfortunately, there are no tests for the home cancer diagnosing, since there is no universal marker like glucose. Oncologists recommend visiting a doctor and perform not one, but several tests. Thus, a universal home test to diagnose cancer is what we are striving to make, but at the moment, there is no reliable tool that could give an accurate result, alas. The word cancer is disturbing and frightening, and everyone wants to know when will a cure for cancer be invented. We've already said that cancer is a disease that occurs due to alterations in the genome, which is present in every human cell. At the same time, each tumor is individual and has its own set of alterations. In addition, each of us has a unique genome, so we react to medicine and other effects in a different manner. But over the past 10 years, doctors and scientists have created new approaches to cancer treatment that give hope. It is impossible to cure cancer if you do not pay attention to the individual characteristics of patients. Medicine is gradually becoming personalized. Over the past 10 years, a completely new type of treatment has emerged. That is immunotherapy. This is being discussed everywhere now. This method is not exactly new, but only in this century we have really functioning methods of cancer immunotherapy. They rely on new molecular developments and understanding of how the immune system works, how our immune cells identify tumor cells, how these cells escape immune control. That is, how they deceive our body to survive. The success in this direction led to a new class of medicines that allows to treat successfully those patients who had no chance to survive even 5, 7, 10 years ago.
Modern developments are aimed at identifying new properties of tumor cells in order to develop new approaches to therapy. Quite a number of methods are being developed in immunotherapy. We are starting to use cellular technologies with the employment of T cells and NK cells, which are applied to strengthen the immune response to the occurrence of a tumor.
Systematic therapies have become the most important direction of development over the past decades. This includes targeted drugs and immune therapy for patients who have cancer. I am a radiation therapist and do not prescribe these medications. Sometimes I envy my fellow oncologists who can prescribe these new medicines to their patients. This is a great achievement in the field of oncology. With those diseases that we recently considered incurable, now the patients can live for years. The more potential targets we have, the more we can do. The more time we can win in this fight. And the technologies that are aimed at finding mutations in the human body over time become cheaper and more accessible for the widespread use. Now we are saying that we are on the doorstep of the personalized treatment, though it is still far from being fully implemented. But soon, thanks to the development of such methods, which are aimed at finding possible targets, it will become more accessible, and we will be able to select the therapy more properly depending on the characteristics of the patient and his or her tumor. We already have several tools for the treatment of cancer. We can say that we have a large arsenal of medicines. And very important, maybe not the most cutting edge, but quite challenging is the development of personalized treatment, which we have been working on for a long time. This is matching the individual characteristics of a patient with the individual characteristics of treatment. For now, the development is based on statistical approaches, so we find a common problem for many patients, and we find a medicine that works on the problem. As we can see, it really works with a big group of patients. Based on this, we prescribe this medicine to all patients. There are examples when we see that some therapeutics are for small groups of patients. It was first demonstrated with targeted therapy that have tremendous efficacy. Perhaps someday the effect will be lost, but at the initial stages, it 100% works. This is an approach where a patient should be treated as long as necessary, taking into account how the tumor changes. Because it also does not stand still over the course of treatment, it adapts to our effects. Immunotherapy has shown that a short course of treatment may have long-lasting effects. For example, 3 months of treatment may provide decades of life. So, if we combine these approaches, it will be to the great benefit for patients, because then we will approach the treatment much more individually, and its effectiveness will be higher. In the arsenal of our oncologists, there are more and more new tools. Now, oncologists have not only surgical, but also medicinal and genetic scalpels in their hands, allowing them to work with individual cells. Today, the diagnosis of cancer doesn't sound as a verdict. Please tell us about the day when you found out that the disease had receded.
It was the day it was exact as the treatment was finishing. We had a blood test, and they said, "You're fine." And it was just very simple. It wasn't an epiphany, but it allowed me to come to Maui and start my yoga practice, because my body had atrophied, lost all my hair. My body had atrophied to a skeletal kind of state. And I went and sat at a yoga room very close to where I am right now. And my teacher said, "Just sit and watch." And I sat for 3 days, and she said, "Now begin." So I watched all the students, and I learned from the students the practice, and within 3 months I'd purged all the chemicals, and my body was back to a normal state. And then I went off to do another movie.
And the Oscar goes to Dennis Gassner for Bugsy.
On August 1st, 2019, I started being in remission. It was my second birthday. It's hard to talk about emotions, but we'd been going to this for a long time. When Olga told my mother not to worry and that I would leave the clinic on my own, I already knew then that I would walk out on my own feet. Mom still remembers this moment and this day. When I say Olga, she remembers this phrase and the little frog toy. During the treatment, I did not catch myself thinking that I was sick. I thought it was just a period when I needed to do this and to be patient a little. We all hope for science. We expect instant solutions from it. But we can't even imagine how difficult and long the way of a new medicine is from the laboratory to the patient.
Drug development is a process that consists of many steps. On average, it takes from 10 to 15 years and costs from hundreds of millions to several billion US. It depends on how much research is needed to bring a drug to clinical practice. It all starts with basic research and the studies on cancer biology, where we try to find potential targets for treatment. Then we look for a drug that will be effective in terms of the created concept. Then this agent is subjected to many years of preclinical research, where it is studied on various cell lines and animal models. Then we understand, firstly, how effective it is against the disease in a relevant model, and secondly, We try to predict and understand how toxic it will be.
The overall process of studying a drug in the clinical setting takes about 5 to 6 years. So it takes about 10 years overall for one drug. Funding is provided at an early stage by grants, nonprofits, various institutions. If we are talking about academic science, or pharmaceutical companies at all stages starting with the molecule and up to the clinical trials, it is very expensive, starting from millions and can reach $1 billion, and there are even developments that cost $1 billion. But it is extremely profitable to develop drugs, and pharmaceutical companies are willing to spend money on these developments. But if we are talking about academic centers, they are also ready to spend money on these developments because they realize that the contribution to general health care is major.
The nature of drug discovery is an art and a science. And I think most people don't appreciate the fact that for every pharmaceutical that is approved, there may have been 10,000 or even upwards of 100,000 compounds tested to get to the point of having the single pharmaceutical. And there may be circumstances where the compound is effective in the animal model, and then very cautiously and after safety screening, toxicology screening, it makes its way to human patients. And the way the human body responds is very different than the way a non-human body is going to respond, or a tumor in a mouse may respond very differently than that same tumor or what we believe is similar tumor in a person. So the rate of attrition is massive. We are really looking at a fraction of a percent of possible or hopeful compounds are going to actually make it to treatment. And this ends up being years of laboratory research involving countless people on using the highest tech available equipment. So the process of just determining whether or not we have a viable product possibility, we've already spent hundreds of millions of dollars.
It is possible to study, create, and develop completely new approaches to the diagnosis and treatment of cancer more effectively by combining efforts, experience, and ideas.
Онкология – это не наука одной страны.
Oncology is not a one-country science. Oncology is the field that attracts the closest attention from researchers and physicians from various countries. Therefore, the most complicated problems are being solved together in frames of cooperative research and information exchange. What kind of support does oncology research need today? Research needs regular financial support. The rules and requirements determine the regulation exactly in the territory where we are located, and these requirements are not always perfect. Many requirements simply do not keep up with the development of modern technologies. And if they are not optimized, they will slow down our work. We are working to try to improve it, but this is a problem that requires a lot of effort. In which areas have we not made progress? How much more must we learn? One of the areas of oncology where we have not succeeded is pancreatic cancer. Unfortunately, all attempts to destroy this tumor failed, and this affects the life expectancy of patients. There are other tumors of the gastrointestinal tract for which the progress is also not very good. We need time. Many drugs are now being studied for these tumors. Some time ago, kidney cancer was also an aggressive and incurable tumor. When I started my career in oncology, the life expectancy of patients with metastatic kidney cancer was 4 to 6 months. After 15 years, The life expectancy of these patients is 5 years. That is, we have added 5 years of life to patients with a poor prognosis, the most difficult category of patients, so we need time and faith. We do not know where the new discovery in oncology will be made, but we are convinced that science and medicine should not have geographical boundaries, just as it is impossible to stop the exchange of knowledge in the whole scientific community. What allows us to see this world indistinguishable with the naked eye? Here is A. Robert Hooke's drawing. He is an English naturalist and inventor. A piece of cork got into the lens of his microscope. He saw correctly positioned voids that looked like honeycombs. Later, he found the same cells not only in dead plant tissue, but also in living ones. Hooke called them cells and described them in the book Micrography, along with his other observations.
And he showed people what things looked like in a microscope. People had no idea that there was a microscopic world. You know, we've only always used our eyes to see the world around us. Now, all of a sudden, people saw things they had never seen before. His microscope only had 20 times magnification. And in those days, when you were a microscopist, you had to be able to draw, you had to be a good artist because there were no cameras. Cameras only came to microscopes about 50 years ago. So you had to be an artist as well to draw what you did. So he was a really good artist and a really good scientist. And he showed people what fleas looked like and ants and the bee's eye and flowers and stuff that people had no idea that there was this microscopic world. And it pretty much blew the mind of everybody, especially one guy called Leeuwenhoek. Anton van Leeuwenhoek from Holland. Robert Hooke was from England. Leeuwenhoek developed this little tiny handheld microscope. It's a little tiny thing with a little tiny lens the size of a drop of water. And it had a little pin on it, and you'd put the specimen on the pin and you'd hold it up to his eye, and he could get 200 times magnification instead of 20 times magnification. And he discovered blood cells and sperm and microorganisms and things that nobody had any idea that they existed. I mean, imagine that people thought blood was a liquid. Well, it turns out to be blood, you know, red blood cells and white blood cells. Imagine seeing sperm for the first time. They looked like little things running around. That would have been quite a shock, I would think. So all of a sudden, people saw a part of the world they had no idea that existed, and then for the next 200 years, and I don't understand why this is, no one ever used a microscope in science. But it wasn't until about 1850, the guy named Virchow in Germany started using microscopes to look at tissues of people who were sick. And he discovered that you could use a microscope to tell what kind of sickness somebody had. They could look at the cells, they could look at the blood, they could look at the tissue and compare it to normal tissue compared to diseased tissue. And all of a sudden there was this tool to tell exactly what kind of disease somebody had. So this is the beginning of something called pathology. So this guy Virchow was, and also Schleiden and Schwann, a couple of other German guys, they developed this idea that you could use a microscope to diagnose diseases. And that, of course, completely changed biology and medicine. You know, microscope is still the icon. You know, you talk about science, they show a picture of a microscope.
Life begins with a cell, and the answers to all questions should be found right in it. Yes, we know a lot about its structure, functions, and organelles. We also decoded the genome that is located in the nucleus and controls its life. But we don't know much yet, and until we find necessary information, we will not overcome many diseases, not only cancer. How has your life changed? I guess I just know what I want to do and what for. Previously, everything was not clear. You live and plan something for a month, and now you just do everything at once that is most important. I try not to deceive myself.
it's like any journey, you know, you go on that allows you to reflect on who you are as a young person, and then projecting into who you are going to be in the future. And so I've found I found out who I am, I think, through that experience more than anything. I think that's part of any journey. And you know, I've been a big believer that fate is a part of life, and you take what comes to you. I learned that I will learn how to manage stress much better, which I have in the last 25 years, and become more at peace with myself in that. But I realize I still have to do the hard work of yoga, because yoga is a cellular reproducing practice, and you want to keep that motion within yourself, so that you can have the strength for whatever comes to us. So it's a combination of the physical strength, but also the mental strength.
What advice would you give to those who are going through this? Firstly, search for the right information and read about good outcomes. Secondly, you should remember that any black stripe is followed by a white one. I think now I'm much stronger physically and mentally than I used to be before.
Listen to yourself, and find the best team of people around you that can give you the best advice. Learn as much as you can. I read a lot about it. Some was relevant, some wasn't. It's a great metaphor for life. You know, you try and find what works for you as an individual. And everything that I've already talked about, I think, is relevant to examine. But you still have to live your life, and take that on board to enjoy the experience, even though it's painful, because it is you.
Will there be a day when cancer is defeated?
Definitely.
No. Yes. No. I think yes.
Well,
it certainly will.
I don't think so.
I think we have to agree what is defeated. You know, is there going to be a day when nobody gets cancer? That's extremely unlikely. We can defeat cancer, and we are defeating cancer in a variety of ways. But it's never going to be that people don't get cancer. That's an unrealistic thing, because, as I mentioned, most cancers occur by chance. You know, the replication of DNA is fundamental to life. And to the extent that mistakes that are made in replicating DNA are the fundamental and major cause of cancer, you know, cancer is always going to be with mankind, but it doesn't have to be killing people.
This makes me think that oncological disease is not a punishment of God and not an accident, but some kind of continuation of human biology. Accordingly, the more we achieve in terms of human life expectancy, the more often we will encounter malignant neoplasms.
I think there will be a point where we understand enough about biology to seize control of unregulated cell growth. That it's inevitable that we will find a way to do it.
Immunotherapy will continue to be developed further. Perhaps immunology is the only area where we can improve something, not because we have created something better than nature, but because we have learned to remove the mechanisms that the tumor invents to deceive the immune system. We are already seeing progress in the treatment of breast cancer, prostate cancer, and melanoma. Today, people can live with lung cancer despite the fact that this disease was previously unapproachable. It's all thanks to therapy.
I believe that thanks to the current technologies, we will learn how to solve this problem. Modern achievements already demonstrate that the majority of oncological disease can be cured and patients will not relapse. This is something we work on every day. Without this hope and inspiration, our work would have no meaning.
Sooner or later, cancer will be defeated. We believe in science because it has proven its power more than once. But I want to say that not everything depends on science. A lot depends on ourselves. Music sounds in everyone. The music of cells. Listen to it and take care of the musicians, the cells of your body. Eat healthy food, breathe fresh air, and think about good things. Then the orchestra from your cells will be able to sound harmoniously, and science will do the rest.